Level 989.
Welcome to a 989 on Health Extra. These quick supplements should help ease any withdrawal symptoms you may experience while waiting for our next full episode. So, Mike, what's on today's agenda?
I came across an interesting article at theguardian.com that explored the possibilities and issues behind something called Aerotoxic Syndrome, a sickness that's still pretty firmly in the alleged category, but is still worthy of more research, in my opinion. Basically, aerotoxic syndrome is the result of contaminated air that you would breathe while on an airplane. The process of keeping airplane air circulating is somewhat unusual. They don't fly around with a giant tank of fresh air to use throughout the flight. The actual method is explained by the article on The Guardian, which we'll link to in the show notes. Quote, since the 1950s, aircraft have used what's known as the bleed air system to filter air through cabins. Air is sucked through the engine compressor, the cold part of the engine, before it's siphoned off into the air conditioning units, where it mixes with the recirculated cabin air. Problems occur when the oil used to lubricate the combustion parts of the engine heat up, and chemicals leak back through damaged or inefficient seals into the compressor, and from there, into the cabin air. The article goes on to say, filters in the air conditioning units are designed to remove bacteria, viruses, and dust. Obvious leaks, identified by smoke or dirty sock smells, are known as fume events and can cause acute toxicity, with symptoms ranging from runny nose to memory loss, severe headaches, loss of balance, and muscle weakness. But the constant, low-level, silent seepages are, crew and pilots claim, just as much of a problem. End quote. Part of me has to wonder, when the first engineer came up with the idea of bleed air from the engine being used for people to breathe, why didn't someone speak out and say, do we really want to be breathing air that's passed through any part of an engine? Of course, we're talking about a design concept that's 60 or more years old. People were exposed to all sorts of chemicals back then, from tobacco smoke to asbestos to lead and gasoline, all on a daily basis. So the idea of using bleed air from an engine probably didn't throw up any red flags when it was proposed. Aerotoxic syndrome is going to be a tricky thing to prove or disprove. It's very difficult to come up with an average number of hours the average airline passenger spends on aircraft. Some folks never fly. Others are jetting off to new exotic locales every few months. Others, who need to fly for work, might be on a plane several times a week. The members of flight crews are the ones hardest hit by symptoms, and with long flights getting even longer, get this, some flights can last 17 hours, and that's just flight time. Boarding and deboarding can take even longer, so you could say up to 18 or 19 hours. Imagine being on a plane from 7 a.m. in the morning until 2 o'clock the next morning, and that's the amount of time some of these crews are on board. Even if they're not working the full flight, maybe they're napping, taking a break, what have you, they're still breathing the same air for almost 20 hours. When you start looking into aerotoxic syndrome, you realize that the list of possible contaminants in the air is pretty long. We're talking ozone, de-icing fluid, carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, toilet fluids, and off-gassing from interior material, along with a whole slew of others too numerous to mention. The off-gassing one caught my eye. It's an air pollutant we're all familiar with. You know when you get a new car and all the plastic and foam are letting out all their chemicals into the air, that's off-gassing. Now imagine the hundreds of foam seats and hundreds of plastic tray tables on a new plane. And those are just two examples of the hundreds of possible airborne contaminants. The reactions from airline companies is about what you'd expect. Many deny that aerotoxic syndrome is a real thing, while others are allowing for the possibility and are doing more testing of the cabin air. Most airlines are pointing out the fact that the current air standards set by the FAA are being met. But it's a fair question, I think, to say, fine, you're within legal limits, but could the air be cleaner? Could the air be better? There's always room for improvement. Often, regulations can be decades old and in dire need of updating. Now, some of the totally new aircraft designs that have launched in the past few years have left the bleed air design behind in favor of better alternatives. To quote from the Guardian article once again, Boeing has been the only airline manufacturer to adopt a new clean air system on board its 787 Dreamliner. The Boeing 787 would have a no-bleed architecture that would eliminate the risk of engine oil decomposition products being introduced into the cabin supply air in the rare event of a failed seal. End quote. There have been a whole slew of lawsuits against the airlines from crew members who've been suffering a wide variety of symptoms, all attributed to aerotoxic syndrome. But many of these same crew members have died before the lawsuits could come to completion. This seems like a sadly common pattern, from asbestos to tobacco to concussions for pro athletes. The big industries deny, they claim evidence is inconclusive, until finally, decades later and after a bitter fight, class action suits force the companies to pay out huge penalties, all while the consumers and workers continue to suffer. Just once, it would be nice if an industry said, we have no proof there's a problem, but let's be proactive and do all we can to improve the situation. Obviously, that would not be the profitable approach, but it would be the correct one. So, what's the takeaway from all this? I'm not sure. I found the article interesting, and you should definitely give it a read. I think wherever we work, we realize that conditions could be better, and it's important to strive and improve things in any way that we can, especially when you're new to a job, and some issues that the established workers just kind of accept as a legacy issue. As new people, we should speak up and try to solve problems to help out where you can. It's easy to forget that the crews on the flights that we take are not glorified drink servers. They're really there to manage the situation in case of an emergency, get everyone to safety in those instances. It's easy to forget that as safe as air travel is, for the flight crews, they're risking their lives in more ways than one, and a crash landing might be the least of their concerns.
That's all for now. You can find links to read more about today's topics at level989.com. Why not take a moment to rate or review us in iTunes, or give us a mention on social media? We can't help everyone if they don't know we exist. Don't rely on us as an alternative to medical advice from a professional healthcare provider. For the full disclaimer, please see our website. Thanks for listening, and now, go health yourself.